only one that's emerged is a Brextension, a suggested longer 21-month transition period proposed by Donald Tusk, the EU president, as a way of solving the Northern Ireland border issue. She may be forced to look this particular gift horse in the mouth, as MPs from her own party are furious and have made it clear that it's a present they really don't want. There was also a tough message from the French President, Emmanuel Macron. He said it wasn't up to the EU to make concessions to deal with British internal politics. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
In 5.5 months, Britain will be out of this room, no longer taking part in the decisions made here, but subject to the rules in the transition period. Last night, the Prime Minister, behind closed doors, told EU leaders she was willing to consider extending that period. Today, in public, she sounded less than comfortable defending the initiative.
What has now emerged is the idea that an option to extend the implementation period could be a further solution to this issue of the backstop in Northern Ireland. What we are not doing, we are not standing here proposing an extension to the implementation period.
The Prime Minister insisted it was only an option. Government sources say it could amount to a few months' extension. European Union leaders have talked of a year's extension, and the Commission President today suggested it was a pretty good bet the option of an extension would get used.
This prolongation of the transitional period probably will happen. That's a good idea. It's not the best idea the two of us we had, but I think that this is giving us some room to prepare the future relation in the best way possible.
So why did Theresa May risk even talking about such a toxic issue on this trip?
After Brexit happens next year, Britain's due to enter into a transition period during which it negotiates a whole new relationship with the EU. But the EU's never been sure that relationship will be sorted out in time, and it's wanted a safety net or guarantee that there'll be no border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, whatever happens after the transition. Britain doesn't like the plan that the EU has come up with, Northern Ireland staying in the single market and the customs union effectively, and has come up with its own plan for a UK-wide temporary customs union with the EU. The EU is saying that is a whopping piece of work. A treaty. It'll take ages to do, and so it's asking for the transition period to be pushed further along to make time for those arrangements to be put in place. But the EU plan for Northern Ireland might still stay in the treaty that Britain exits the EU by. It's not entirely clear the other arrangement will be ready. There's a lot still undecided.
Thank you.
Back home, Theresa May's announcement seemed to unite pro-Remain and pro-Brexit Tory MPs in outrage.
During the transition period, the EU will be able to make our laws, the ECJ will be able to judge our laws, and we will have to pay for the privilege, and we will have no say over it at all. It is the vassal state. 21 months is already too long.
I was never in favour of a transition period because it puts us in a position weaker in terms of negotiating on behalf of Britain with the European Union. If we're going to extend it as well and pay for the pleasure of it, who could be in favour of this?
Last night, after Theresa May spoke for nearly 20 minutes to EU leaders, she had to leave the room to dine alone while they chewed over Brexit together at dinner and then retired to the bars of Brussels. Chancellor Merkel, asked by a passerby how Brexit was going, said, "Please, it's a lovely evening. Let's not spoil it with that." The French president's irritation was clear in his end-of-summit press conference.
Aujourd'hui, ça n'est plus un sujet technique.
Today, it's no longer a technical issue. All the technical scenarios have been discussed. Now it is as to the political ability of the United Kingdom to reach an agreement which can be presented to us. It is not for the European Union to make some concessions in order to deal with a British political issue.
Some listening to Chancellor Merkel's remarks at the private dinner last night thought they suggested she might want more flexibility than some other leaders. Theresa May could really do with that, as time and patience back home runs very thin.
Well, Gary is with me now. Now, Gary, in the criminology of Brexit, wording matters enormously. Did she ask for more time, or was she offered it?
There is a certain amount of disingenuousness going about on this very matter. I think at the very top of both negotiating trees, there's been talk for a long time. This comes against the background of this kind of talk of people looking at the duration of the transition and saying, boy, that's just not long enough. You'll never manage it. And what also matters here is that there is Article 50, the treaty that they're negotiating at the moment, that's got to be signed, sealed, delivered ahead of Brexit itself in March. That's the last opportunity to add anything to the transition. You can't just do it sometime later. It's not the way the laws of the EU work. So the door is closing. But there's this other matter. Both sides are working on this, trying to get up and running something like a UK-wide customs arrangement, temporary customs arrangement, that could mean that as the British government sees it, more toxic EU version of a backstop that puts Northern Ireland in the single market and customs union that you don't need now. Now, that process does require time, so I think this has come a little bit from both sides. Theresa May at one point in a press conference said, it is what has emerged, as if it dropped from the ceiling. I really don't think that's the case.
But more time for her is also a political poison chalice back in London, isn't it?
Yes, and back in London, things were swirling today. I heard cabinet ministers muttering that they really felt they'd been kept out of the loop. They should not be, they felt, ambushed by announcements like this. They know what it's building up to in terms of the common, the temporary customs arrangement, the UK-wide backstop. But they just didn't really appreciate waking up to those headlines. You've got, we were talking about Tories from both sides of the party uniting. She's managed to unite them, but against her and against this idea. Scottish Tories piping up saying, well, hang on, if you're extending the transition, that means the thing we were planning to campaign on for the Holyrood elections, Britain coming out of the common fisheries policy, won't actually have happened. So a lot swirling there. She's in for a very tough week next week, and she's got to do a statement about what she was up to here on Monday.
Gary, thanks very much indeed. Well, earlier I caught up with the former Finnish Prime Minister Alexander Stubb, who is running to replace Jean-Claude Juncker as the head of the European Commission. And I began by asking him if Brexit was really Europe's biggest headache.
Probably not. I think a lot of people are looking at other issues like migration, the future of work, technology and climate change. Brexit is a necessary evil, I think, for a lot of us. We don't like it, it's going to happen, and we have to get on with it.
You have very personal connections to Britain. Your wife is British. Do you think that Britain should be made an example of so that other countries don't try and do the same thing?
No, you have to look at it in three phases. The first one is the withdrawal agreement. That's where you see a lot of tough talk from Europe and tough negotiation. It's normal. Second one is the transition period, make it as long as possible. And third one is the future relationship. And I, of course, think, as a strong Anglophile, that the relationship between the UK and the EU in the future should be as close and strategic as possible.
But is your feeling at the moment that actually there might not be a deal at all?
Well, there'll be a deal at the end of the day.
We always,
yeah, because it goes through three phases: crisis, chaos, suboptimal solution. So we'll have a suboptimal solution at some stage. Not today, not tomorrow, not this week, but perhaps in November.
There's an opinion poll out just yesterday in Italy that Italy, one of the founding members of the European Union, only 44%, according to this poll, want to stay in the European Union. That's fewer than we have in the UK.
Yeah, it's true. But again, there is a link between Europe bashing and opinion polls. You guys bashed Europe for 40 years and you see where you ended up with Brexit. And I think we need to have a little bit more open of a discourse about what Europe is about, good and bad.
But in Italy, there hasn't been Europe bashing for as long as we've had it in the UK. And yet even there, people are losing faith.
Well, it's true. But the truth is that if you look at what Salvini is saying about Europe and the rest of it, then there's a lot of bashing going on.
He could be the next Italian Prime Minister. He sets the tone for much of European politics. How do you deal with someone like him?
Well, in Finland we have experience. There's no magic potion or one recipe, but what we did with the true Finns was to hug them to death. Took them into government in 2015. They had promised no more austerity. We pushed austerity. They had promised no more money to Greece. We gave money to Greece and they said no more migration, and 2015 was what it was. And at the end of the day, when they came to power, they realized they had responsibility. Their popularity halved and now they're out of government. So hug them to death is my answer.
You want to be the Spitzenkandidat, the leading candidate for the centre-right bloc. How will you try and reconnect that relationship between the European citizen and what goes on in this city here?
Well, the first thing to do is to connect with values, remind that we have probably the most successful model of society, which is based on human rights, fundamental rights, liberty, tolerance, equality, liberal democracy and the rule of law. That's the anchor that we have. And then second, start solving problems. That's the thing. People are really afraid that they have a job in the future. people are afraid of migration, and start dealing with this. But there's so many leaders that lead right now with hate and fear, and I really hate that. If you're a political leader, you need to talk about hope and solutions, not about hate and failure.
Okay, so give me your hope and solution pitch in 20 seconds.
Yeah, well, first of all, take care of climate change, make Europe a leader in it, and secondly, make Europe a leader also in technological development. That's the future. You know, the artificial intelligence and robotization, it's going to change the economy and work, it's going to change politics and media, science, and probably the future of mankind. Let's do this together.
But do you really think that spirit of solidarity, of unity of values, which is what the European Union was founded on, actually still exists at the heart of it?
My answer is yes. We've had three big ideologies over 100 years. Fascism we killed in 1945, communism we killed in 1989, and liberalism, I hope we did not start killing in 2016 with Brexit and Trump. We need to remind ourselves that these are values which we hold true. They work and they are humanitarian.
You're not the only person who believes that. So why is that message not getting through in sufficient numbers to the citizens of Europe?
Well, it's very difficult to do the division, but I do think that people haven't rejected traditional European values of liberal democracy, but people have rejected, for instance, globalization, because some people feel that, hey, this is not a good thing for me. So my argument is that Europe is good at baking the cake and increasing the size of the economy, but it's bad at distributing it.
Alexander Stubb, thank you very much.
Thanks.
And I leave you with the words of President Macron, who said that every day there isn't a deal, a no deal becomes far more likely. A no deal used to be the freakish scenario here. Well, frankly, it's moving ever more centre stage. Back now to Krish in London. Krish.
Thanks, Matt. Well, joining